All right. So this is the project guidelines document, the one that's linked on your homeroom. By the way, I forgot if I had mentioned this before, but on the homeroom, every like Google Doc that I make for any study group is going to go into here. So here we have our project one guidelines. Later, you're going to see there's going to be a lot more docs. But here, this is also like the archive. I think I did mention this at some point, but this is the archive for the things that go on the homeroom. So just in case you want to like refer to something that was in like a project guidelines doc or another doc, they will all live there because this keeps changing. Okay, so let's see, where are we at? Yeah, so the guideline that I gave was to have your data cleaned by end of the week. So that sounds like that's like a lot of where you are, sounds like this is where you are all at. So I think we're on track. I would say data cleaning and just figuring out like what kind of questions you're going to ask. Everything that comes before, even creating the graphs, that's what takes the longest. So yeah, I feel like a lot of people feel like they might be behind time because they're still data cleaning, but that's absolutely okay. Just to set up for later, because I'm going to talk about presentations, just want to point you all to this section over here. This is like the last page of the guidelines. I have a presentation template, and this is a very, very brief template that I'm going to walk through and like talk through like what kind of information I would like to see in a presentation. And then these are just some other examples. I do want to also reiterate, I'm not going to go through the examples, but this is for you to just like take a look and see what other people are doing. Do want to reiterate that the project has slightly changed over the course of the past like 2 years. So some of these presentations might look like they're talking about different things or data that we don't have. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these. Use these more as like inspiration for like structure, if anything. Or maybe like design, I don't know. Okay, so since you all are working on like the data cleaning part, and I want to talk about some things to keep in mind as you're looking at this specific data set. So this data set, and actually let me pull that up real quick. This data set comes from a bunch of different sources. When you have a data set with many, sorry, I have so many different classes. All right. When you have a data set with different sources, one of the harder things to do is joining the tables, because likely you want to associate, let's say one table has genre information, one table has, I don't know, budget information, and you want to put that together. Joining the data is one of the harder things to do. So as an example, let's just pull up the GitHub and just roughly look at the tables. I hope this shows up. If not, I have to, okay, let me just clone this down. So maybe I won't clone it down, but I can talk briefly about the data because I kind of remember it. So I think there's like quite a few tables that come from IMDb. When it comes to joining data, a good rule of thumb, especially from data sets out in the real world that come from different sources, try and look for the most consistent information to join your tables on. I don't know if some of you have tried doing this yet, but IMDb, they have like an ID column, and an ID column is unique for every movie. There are some other IDs that are also like people, like actor, director IDs, stuff like that. ID columns are usually some of the most reliable columns to join on, because you definitely know that if this ID 123 is for the Avengers, for example, that in another data set, ID 123 is going to correspond to the Avengers. Even if you just like pull up your data frame to just give it like a check for like a sanity check, that works too. With this data set in particular, I think one of them, I want to say it's either like maybe Rotten Tomatoes or maybe the Numbers data set. Some of them don't have IDs. So when there are no IDs, what is the next best thing that you can join on? I think most people would think, okay, well, I'll join it on the movie title. Now with title and movie titles, you run into some issues. So it's really up to you how you want to deal with these issues, but consider like, again, the Avengers. I'm a big Marvel fan if you can't tell, but like consider the Avengers. Some data sets might list the Avengers movie title as The Avengers. Some of them might list it as like Marvel's The Avengers as an example. So this inconsistency is going to lead to problems when you're joining your data set. For this project, do not go through the trouble of editing the names of the movies to join them. Please don't do that. That's, I think, not worth it for this project. Another example, I think like Harry Potter is an example in this data set that is pretty inconsistent. Like I think like the Chamber of Secrets, for example, versus like Harry Potter and the Chamber of, I forget what the exact example is, but I think that there are also inconsistencies. So look out for those, especially when you're deciding to join on a column like a string that's a name. Pros and cons of doing that. Yes, you will get to associate data that cannot be associated by an ID, but you'll probably end up with a lot of missing values, or you'll end up dropping a lot of rows because you cannot associate the data. So do keep that in mind. If you decide to join data sets by name, and let's say you go from like 1,000 movies down to like 200, for this project, that's okay. Because right now we're not looking at dealing with data inconsistencies. If that's something that you see occurring in your data in your project, and you have like much fewer movies to do that, just make a note of it in your notebook and then do the analysis that you would have done if you had the full data set. Again, our job here is not to deal with data inconsistencies. It's really like cleaning and going from numbers to insights, things like that. It's not a priority for this project. All right. That was kind of the main thing I wanted to talk about as you all are getting more into the cleaning process. Just know that I think TMDB has also like IDs that associate with some of these other columns, but do look into it. IDs are usually good ones to join your tables over. Also, in talking yesterday, I realized that nowhere in this data set you have any of the genre information. So what I'm going to do is I will send you all a dictionary mapping the genre names to the genre numbers. So I'll send that out to you all right after this. Yeah, it actually comes from the TMDB API. I thought it was in this data set, but it isn't. I think every cohort, there's someone who just finds it and throws it in the channel, but no worries. I will put that in the channel after this today. Cool. Is there anyone have any questions or thoughts on anything I just mentioned? Perfect. Oh, question. Yeah.
We can use .merge to join these data frames or data sets, right?
Yep. That's right.
No.
Yep. So there's .merge. I like .merge the best because I feel like it's the easiest one to use. There's .join and there's .concat. I think one of like .join, I think you have to set something to the index first. There's one of them that you have to like set the column that you want to join on to the index, and then you can join it. .merge, you don't have to do that. So if anyone is working on joining tables, I think that .merge is the most flexible one. Nice. Anything else? Sweet. All right. Now I'm going to talk about presentations. Of course, I don't expect any of you all to be working on your presentations right now, but I think it's a good idea to keep in mind the things that you're going to be presenting as you're doing your analysis. So any of your like thought processes that you're documenting in your notebook can kind of be in line with this presentation. Again, want to point out that there are some examples that feel free to look at if you'd like. So of course, what I have here is a blank template, just like a skeleton of what a presentation should be, and I'll talk through what I expect to see in this presentation. I want to also point out that this order doesn't have to be the order in which you do your presentation. If you find that you have a better way of presenting information, this is not static. So you can definitely change this up. You definitely don't have to like copy these slides over. But this is like a very rough structure, and I'm just going to mention all the things that you should include in your presentation. The order does not really matter. Of course, you want it to flow nicely with whatever narrative that you're trying to present. Okay, so these are my suggestions. Well, first slide, obviously, you have your project title, maybe your subtitle, put your name on there. Why you want to have your name is because this presentation, I'm going to talk about it next week as we get ready to submit the project. This presentation is actually going to be on your GitHub repo as well. So we will talk about that then. I think something that is most important about these non-technical presentations is the business case. The role of a data scientist and what makes it so unique from like an engineer or like, yeah, data engineer or kind of, well, also unique from an analyst, I guess, in some ways, is that the data scientist very often serves as the bridge between technical and non-technical. And so that's very important because yes, on the one hand, we are doing all this like intense code. Like right now we're doing like a lot of lines in pandas. Maybe you're doing some sort of analysis that requires lines and lines of code. But what's most important from like the output of a data scientist is what kind of findings, what kind of insights, what kind of, I don't know, suggestions do you have for your team, your business, the company that is hiring you to do the work? So that's really what the most value add a data scientist can bring. So therefore, I do think it's very important that in your presentation, whether it is at the start or you weave it throughout, you talk about your overview, your why, your motivation, what your business case is. For this project, yes, the business case here is that, you know, we want to make some suggestions for kinds of movies or some strategy in, you know, for this Microsoft's version of Netflix for their production studio. Keep that in mind. Of course, that's your business case. If you want to get more specific than that, depending on like what kinds of questions you're going to answer, like maybe you take a very budget approach, mention that in your business case. Maybe you're taking the approach of like who to hire, put that in your business case. You want to get your business case to be as specific as possible so that as you're presenting your findings, there is going to be context for your audience to relate back to. So yeah, maybe if you want to explain why you're doing this analysis, I think, again, I'm going to really hammer down the business case is very, very important in these presentations. Also, as part of your data, as part of your presentation, you should mention just very briefly what data did you use? I know we provided like 11 CSV files, but mention which were the ones that you did and I'm using. Don't list the CSV file names. That means nothing to your non-technical audience. Oh, something I forgot to mention at the very start. Consider your audience as well. So for this presentation, the audience is going to be the people in, here, let's see what it says. The audience is going to be, let's see, where does it say? Yeah, here. The head of Microsoft's new movie studio. So that is your audience for this presentation. So keep that in mind. So when you're introducing your sources, just tell them I got my data from IMDb, TMDB. That's good enough. If you use a provided data set, just mention which sources they were. If you use an API or you web scrape for your data, just very briefly say, oh, I scraped data from this source. I pulled data from this API. And along with that, a very high level summary of your data. Before you even go into like, you know, your findings and analysis, you need to provide some context of that. For example, like how many movies were included in your analysis? Because if you give the conclusion that, let's say you want to conclude, Microsoft, you should make more action movies. They're like, okay, sure. What subset of movies that were ever created is this based on, right? What is your sample? So you should say, okay, well, give them the information here that, okay, this is based on movies that were released in the past 20 years, or this is based off a subset of like 1,000 movies of all genres over the past 10, 20 years, as an example. So very high level snapshot of your data. I think, yeah, as another example, movies released in English, maybe you decide to subset that way. So yeah, maybe some of the decisions that you're making in the cleaning of your data, you may bring back here. Notice that nowhere in this presentation, we talked about what your cleaning steps were. Yes, I understand that like most of this project is data cleaning and data wrangling and getting your data into the form that that works best for your analysis. But nowhere in this presentation should you talk about what your cleaning steps were. If there is anything very specific that you did, like for example, let's say you, I don't know, maybe you like engineered like a column that is, I don't know, movies that are part of franchises. Maybe you can mention something like that. I don't even know if that data is easy to engineer, but only if you did something very, very significant to your analysis in your data cleaning or wrangling stage, then mention that. If it's just like a series of like pandas functions that you're explaining, we don't want that. The head of Microsoft Movie Studios doesn't need to know that. Okay. This is just the way that I structured this presentation. But again, you can structure it however you like when you're presenting your insights. So insight number 1, 2, 3, I mentioned that you should be answering 3 questions or providing 3 actionable insights. This is what you should include. Of course, the visualization, again, that's like the final product of this project, the visualization or visualizations that support your suggestion or your actionable insight. A few lines explaining why, if that is necessary as well. So let's say like, if you think that someone who's just looking at your graph, if you feel like maybe it's not immediately obvious what your point is, you can add a few lines onto your slide explaining why, if necessary. One more thing that I think a lot of people overlook is that these are PowerPoint slides. Like you can do this on Google Slides, Microsoft PowerPoint, whatever, any like slideshow software. You want to take advantage of that still. We're not allowed, it's not as if we're not allowed to use functions like creating circles or arrows to like highlight different parts of the presentation. So for example, you want to like highlight something like this. Maybe you give it like a red box to make it very, very obvious. Okay, focus on this part of the graph. You can 100% do that. Use like boxes, circles, arrows to highlight specific parts of your visualization. Again, like this presentation should only be about 5 to 8 minutes long. You want to make things as clear as possible. You don't want to have people like squint and try and read your graph. If you find that you're having to do that, add something like an annotation to help make it even clearer. And yeah, if you did any like very specific useful feature engineering for a specific insight, you want to mention that as well. Cool. I feel like for this project, a summary conclusion slide is really just like a summary of all your insights. In future presentations, this is actually going to be a little bit different from, the main bulk of your presentation. But for this particular project, where it's mainly like an EDA presentation, if you can like summarize all your insights and if applicable, add any overall recommendations. And then as part of Flatiron School's project requirement, you should talk about next steps, because with any project, there can always be room for doing, adding more parts to your analysis, or maybe getting more data. So you should have this slide on your presentation. What further analysis can be done with more time or resources? Further analysis or future work that can really be interpreted however you think. Maybe you would like to like code out something much more complicated than you had time for. You can mention that. If you just wanted to get more data, that's a good one to mention. That's usually a pretty easy one that people always put in future steps. But yeah, you also want to have your future steps. And then finally, a thank you slide. Might seem very trivial, but you should always have a thank you slide at the end of your presentation, especially because for these projects, this is going to go on your GitHub repo. So you should link to your profile, maybe some of your contact info if you'd like. So you can link your resources used. So for example, let's say, maybe not so much this project, but in future projects, let's say you follow the project process of another project that's already been done. You do want to acknowledge your source. You may want to link your GitHub repo here, give any like thanks or acknowledgements if you want. And yeah, for more professional purposes, you might want to link your contact info, like your LinkedIn or your email. I do want to highlight, like, yeah, this is the last slide. I do want to highlight that the bulk of the work that you're putting into this project right now is not going to be reflected in your presentation, in the sense that like now, like more than 50% of the work that you're going to be putting in is in the data cleaning, is in the data wrangling. That's not going to be reflected on your presentation. Really take the perspective that you are going to be presenting this. Yes, you're going to be presenting this to me and the rest of the class, but really take the perspective that you're presenting this to the head of Microsoft, the Microsoft Movie Studio. Who is it again? Yeah, the head of Microsoft's new movie studio. So really think of like, act like you're presenting this to them and really think about what do they care about? What kind of questions might they ask you? Might they need to clarify based on what information you're sharing? Cool. Well, that is all I had to share for today. Again, I do recommend just at least like looking really quickly at some of the examples. There's some really neat ones here, and the way that they utilize that, the way that they utilize their visualizations with their presentation. But yeah, any questions regarding presentations? Then I can stop the recording. We can talk about some other questions.
So for the, the thank you slide, you said provide links to the resources you use. Is that similar to earlier when we provide the overview where we provide the data sets, the data frames that we use? Is that the same thing or?
I see. I would say like, in this section, you talk about like your data sources. If you already have your data sources here, I would say not necessary to, because this presentation, it will live on your GitHub repo. And in your README, which I'll talk about next week, that's where you'll go into more detail about like what like data sources you use. So for example, if you're using the provided data set, I would just in this slide say like I use IMDb, TMDB, or like Rotten Tomatoes or whatever. And then here I wouldn't mention it.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. This like acknowledgement is more for like, let's say you follow like a project walkthrough. Again, not as applicable for this project, but maybe for like later projects. You follow like a project walkthrough that someone published online. And if you followed their project process quite closely, or you took a lot of inspiration from another project, then that's the kind of thing you would acknowledge here.
Would you also say these 7 slides, is that an appropriate number of slides to have, or?
You probably will have more, to be honest, because like you're gonna have 3 insights, but I only have like 1. I only have 1 here, so probably more. I think most people have about like 10 slides. I would say like they might combine these slides. It's really up to you and how you think. I would like just optimize for clarity. You want your information to be as clear as possible. So if you feel like you can get more clarity across with more slides, do that. Fewer slides, do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? All right, then let's talk about some other questions if y'all have any.